Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Beatles Forever. In our last episode, Mal worked hard to get the Iveys to sign a contract. He was doing it to help the Beatles in their business. And he was doing a good job in his business life, but in his personal life, Mal was a mess. He met a younger woman and she got pregnant, and then his pen pal fan club girl thought she was in love with Mal. But luckily, he talked to her about life and things didn't go any further. So let's see what's going on today. On May the 15th, the Apple Boutique had to whitewash the Fool's mural because of local pressures. To George's mind, that's just typical of the narrow minds we were trying to fight against. That's what the whole 60s flower power thing was about. Go away, you bunch of boring people. The whole government, the police, the public, everybody was so boring. And then suddenly people realized they could have fun. Once we were told we had to get rid of the painting, the whole thing started to lose its appeal. The place was losing money at an alarming rate, perhaps as much as £200,000 during its brief period of operation, and the Apple Boutique was slated for closure on July 31st. In a press release, Paul stated the decision to a shared commitment to the company's core vision. Our main business is entertainment communication. Apple is mainly concerned with fun, not with frocks. We want to devote our energies to records, films, and our electronic ventures. We had to refocus. On the evening of July 30th, the refocusing began when the Beatles and their significant others selected a few last-minute goods for themselves from the shop. It was quiet when we slipped in, and Mal wrote feeling much like thieves in the night, for even though it did belong to them, there was that feeling of not wanting to be caught. I know myself I was very hesitant about touching anything, expecting at any minute for alarms to sound, but overcoming the diffidence, I proceeded to stuff everything I could lay my hands on into large bags. The second phase ended when I realized that none of the clothes I put into the bags would fit my large frame, so I proceeded to put everything back, keeping an Apple Watch for myself. The next day, the Beatles flung open the doors of the shop to the public for a madcap giveaway in which the police were called, as in the Beatlemania days of old, to quell the near riot that ensued. Mal had to refocus once again at Apple. In New York City, John and Paul had met John Cass, the 33-year-old American music executive who had managed Liberty Records' European operation. Cass came highly recommended from Capitol, who handled the group's American distribution for EMI, so the Beatles were all ears. As a leader, he exuded sophistication, cool, competence, elements the boys saw as essential to their brand. With the Apple Boutique ending, John and Paul made a new launch for Apple. Until one of the Beatles decided to tell him otherwise, Mal could take some solace in being managing director of Apple Records. Peter was in place as the AR head, and Derek had assumed the role of Apple Corps' press officer. A solid roster of new talent was beginning to emerge, with the Iveys, James Taylor, and Mary Hopkins on board. For his part, George Harrison was excited about signing 24-year-old Jackie Lomax, whom the Beatles knew from their Mersey Beat and Hamburg days, as a member of the Undertakers. Most recently, the Cheshire-born singer and guitarist had been a member of Brian's stable, recording a trio of singles for CBS with the Lomax Alliance, his backup band. And Paul was eager to bring the Black Dyke Mills Band to Apple. A British institution, the brass band from Yorkshire dated its origins as far back as the early 19th century, and Paul saw them as a vehicle for recording his instrumental Thingamabum. Mal was anxious to scout out new talent, someone to really impress the boys, and he set his sights on Luann Peters, the stage name for Carol Ann Hirsch. A trained actress and singer, Peters, as Carol Keyes, had previously served as frontwoman for the Big Sound, specializing in throaty, blues-driven vocals. She had a dynamite stage presence, and her soulful, colorful rendition of Ike and Tina Turner's A Fool in Love had been released by Columbia in 1966. Mal thought that if he provided Peters with the right song, a Paul McCartney original would fit the bill nicely. She would make an admirable addition to the Apple's growing staple. During the same period, as Mal struggled to maintain his position at Apple, he found himself sidelined again by his other job. Since May, the Beatles had been back to EMI Studios to record their long-awaited follow-up LP to Sgt. Pepper. This meant that the roadie would need to be in high demand, possibly for months on end, to tend to their needs, personal and professional alike. When things got rolling with the new record at the end of May, Mal was greeted by 21-year-old American Chris O'Dell, a new face in the Beatle world. O'Dell had come to London by way of Derek, whom she had briefly worked for as its driver only a few months earlier in Los Angeles. She was now working in the Apple offices at Wigmore Street, filling in here and there for members of the staff and doing odd jobs. The first day I was there, she recalled, John and Yoko were sitting in reception, followed by Paul. They were just starting the White album, so he was there every day, organizing things for the studio. For Chris, Mal was approachable, which helped her to navigate her new environment. She said it was kind of weird being in this world, because for American kids at that time, the Beatles were kind of unreal. I was definitely a Beatles fan, so suddenly being dropped into this world where these people are actually walking around and talking was pretty mind-boggling. Fortunately for O'Dell, Mal was there, like this big teddy bear, and very Liverpudlian. We got to know each other very quickly. At that time, she only knew him as a chief bodyguard, as Derek referred to him. What that meant was, I'd soon learn, is that she had to go through Mal, a burly guy who took his job seriously, to get anywhere near the Beatles. That worked out well for Mal because all the young women who threw themselves at the Beatles ended up bouncing off Mal, who was more than happy to entertain them. After Chris had been at Apple a few days, she asked Paul if she could visit the studio to see the Beatles at work. He said, being naive, I didn't know you weren't supposed to do that. For his part, Paul instructed her to talk to Mal. It was a mantra she heard over and over again during her days at Apple, talk to Mal. So she did, and the roadie invited her to a session at EMI Studios. That night, as she waited outside the studio, Mal was very friendly and very nice. We chatted about all kinds of Apple goings-on, the weather, what he had for dinner, but he never once mentioned going into the studio. After a while, I realized Mal was just passing the time and had no intention of taking me back inside with him. Chris was disappointed, feeling she had been led to believe she was welcome at EMI. I could have asked him straight out, can we go to the studio now? But he knew why I was there, and I had some pride after all. I was also afraid that if I asked him outright, he explained the rule about not having visitors in the studio, and I'd never get inside. Knowing Mal's reputation as the group's chief procurer back in their touring days, Chris was slightly concerned that he might start coming on to her. But her worries were short-lived. Moments later, John's boyhood friend Pete Shotton arrived on the scene, informing Mal that he was needed inside. With Mal having left to tend to the boys' needs, Pete asked Chris if she'd like to join him inside Studio 2, and within minutes, she was standing among John, Paul, and George on the studio floor, providing staccato hand claps along with Pete for Revolution 1. It was at this time war was raging in Vietnam and had become a regular staple of conversation in the studio. Shotton remembered being present one evening when he and the boys were discussing recent student anti-war demonstrations breaking out across Europe and North America. If I had a chance, Mal brusquely interjected, I'd just shoot the whole bloody lot of them. Shotton recalled that the Beatles responded with good-natured boos and catcalls, surprised by their friends' staunch support of the authorities. On Friday, June 7th, the boys took a break from their new record, which they began referring to as the double album, given the considerable amount of material they had composed at Rishikesh. For Mal, the break meant traveling with George to California, where the Beatles was joining Ravi Shankar to film a scene in Raga, Howard Worth's documentary film about Eastern classical music gurus' life and work. Mal had pressures both at home and at work, so he was eager to get away. Scrawling in his diary, the adventure starts here. With Ringo in tow, along with Patty and Mo, the trip must have seemed like old times for the roadie. He played hours of card games on the plane with the two Beatles, hobnobbed with celebrities, and acted the part of tourist without a care in the world. The film's shoot was taking place in nearby Big Sur. Mal and the group stayed in Pebble Beach at the Hotel Del Monte, where the roadie, always on the lookout for celebrities, was delighted to learn that Bing Crosby was also in residence. Settling in their luxurious accommodation, George practiced his sitar, with Mal playing the role of equipment manager. Since they were close to Pebble Beach's world-famous links, George suggested a round of golf. Mal wrote, and it was fantastic. If any sightseers had spotted George, they never connected him with the Beatle of the same name. Picture him standing there, enormous sunglasses, beneath an orange trilby with bright orange suit to match, golf club clutched to his fist, seated in the middle of a green in this crazy little go-kart. The next day, Mal accompanied George to the Coastal Aslan Institute, marveling at the lush scenery as Worth filmed Ravi in the act of teaching George a new raga, as the traditional melodic patterns in the Indian music are called. As the cameras rolled, Mal wrote, they just sat there with their sitars very informally and without any rehearsal or planned dialogue. The next day, Worth filmed establishing shots of George and Ravi walking along the cliffs, while Mal snapped several still photographs of the musicians and of Patty, who was lounging serenely in the California sun. They concluded their vacation in Los Angeles while staying at actor Van Heflin's Brentwood home. Mal enjoyed the opportunity to witness bona fide Hollywood hijinks when they visited Peter Tork's Laurel Canyon home, where the monkey was swimming with several naked women when they arrived. Later, George and Ringo played in a jam session with Tork on piano, Pete Asher on bass, and David Crosby on guitar. The group then flew to New York City, where they stayed at the Drake Hotel, in which Jimi Hendrix and Eric Clapton were also. For Mal, one of the trip's greatest highlights involved taking Ringo and Mo to Hendrix's intimate club performance at the Scene, where the guitar god played a duet with jazz flautist Jeremy Stig. Mal also accompanied George and Eric to Manny's Music, the city's go-to shop for musical instruments, where the Beatle landed a lovely big fat Gibson Jumbo, country and western style. The trip was just what Mal needed. It was a diversion from his real life, troubles back in the United Kingdom, and a chance to meet new people along the way. One of those new faces was 27-year-old singer Harry Nilsson, who had released his debut LP, Pandemonium Shadow Show, with RCA back in December. The album included Nilsson's clever reworking of the Beatles' You Can't Do That, in which Nilsson referenced 18 other Beatles songs in the innovative multi-layered mix. Later that month, Paul made his own trip to the American West Coast to attend Capitol Records' annual convention, which was being held at the Beverly Hills Hilton on June 20th. Tony Bramwell was there, along with Ron Cass, who had recently been appointed president of the Apple Records. Bramwell said Paul announced the Beatles' intention to release their Capitol executives. After the presentation, which Tony described as PR masterpiece, the two returned to their bungalows. They were surprised to see Linda Eastman, the enchanting photographer from the Sgt. Pepper launch party. She had a joint in one hand and a beatific smile on her face, said Tony. Paul immediately detached himself from the circus surrounding him and took Linda aside. As I looked across the room, I suddenly saw something happen. Right before my eyes, they fell in love. It was like the thunderbolt that Sicilians speak of, that the French speak of in hushed tones, that once-in-a-lifetime feeling. Ken Mansfield was also at the convention, where he worked with Paul and Ron, helping them to position Apple among Capitol's growing roster of subsidiaries. At one point, Mansfield marveled at Great Britain's remarkable impact upon popular music. "Gosh," he said to Paul, "I'd really like to come to London someday." Paul responded with mild surprise. "Haven't you been to Europe?" he asked. Later, when Mansfield ferried Paul, Ron, and Tony to the airport, Paul made a point of removing a medallion he had been wearing around his neck and placing it around Mansfield's. "Next time I see you, it'll be in London, maybe." And a few weeks later, Mansfield received a call from Ron, who invited him to England to serve as Apple's U.S. manager. The news of Ron Cass's appointment as president of Apple Records didn't surprise Mal in the slightest. He had been in an emotional and professional freefall since Paul first asked him to take on a leadership role with a new label. "For a long while, he had felt that Apple was getting away from me. My term as managing director of Apple Records was short-lived. The Beatles then got real about the whole thing and brought in professional people. I didn't mind, knowing it was good for the company, but not being a pushy sort of person, I felt I had not real status in Apple, apart from being a buddy and a pal." So I will end the video here. In this episode, Mal was trying hard to find new talent, but along the way, the Apple organization was like shifting sand. It was constantly changing. The Apple boutique was closed after they whitewashed the mural outside the building. The magic was gone. The Beatles decided to concentrate on the music part of their company. Mal was also busy taking care of the Beatles and all their personal and professional and business needs. He went out to California with Ringo and George and their wives and got to play golf with George Harrison at Pebble Beach. New people were added to Apple, and Mal lost his title of managing director of Apple Records when Paul and John decided to add professional people to run the company. Mal was, he said, a buddy and a pal. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you haven't subscribed, if you could do so, it would help the channel to grow, as well as giving it a thumbs up. It's all a great help. And if you haven't clicked on the notification bell, if you could do that, it lets you know when a video is posted. More importantly, I wish everyone a good day, and tune in again soon for another episode of the Beatles Forever. Thank you. Bye.